WMFD.com. It is Coffee Talk with Jay Fox, broadcasting live from the Zoom studios in Ontario, Ohio, and sponsored in part by the Cove Coffee Shop. Our guest today is Tracee Anderson. She's the Executive Director of CASey, Community Action for Capable Youth. Tracee, how are we today?
Doing well, thank you. Excited to be here.
Thank you for being on the program with us. Tell me, first of all, what is Community Action for Capable Youth?
Community Action is a prevention agency and early intervention. We are actually a homegrown organization. 42 years ago in Richland County, a group of parents developed a drug and alcohol and tobacco prevention organization, and we've expanded it today to include not only drug, alcohol, tobacco, and nicotine prevention, but suicide prevention, problem gambling, and of course, violence prevention, which we'll be talking about today.
So the subject that we're going to talk about today is something that some members of our audience may not understand. The subject is cyberbullying. And there's always a line of demarcation from an age standpoint where some folks simply just can't relate to the concept because it never happened to them. You know, growing up in the 70s and 80s, that was not a concern for somebody like me, but playground bullying or in-school bullying or neighborhood bullying may have been a concern. This is a whole different world. So when we talk about cyberbullying, what specifically are we talking about? Is this just social media or is it the whole concept?
It is a whole concept and a big concept. And you're right, we're not talking about kid name calling or some disagreements behind a church in a neighborhood. We're talking about something that is so pervasive today that you're right. It's a hard concept to really wrap your head around because it's so vast. So we're talking about repeated harassment. And that's one of the things in particular that bully is different than just, you know, occasional scuffle with somebody, but repeated harassments or threats of harassment with the intent to harm. And it's used either in electronic format or online or through an electronic device, which of course is part of our daily life now.
So when we talk about threat to harm and we talk about repeated bullying, are we talking about a one-on-one experience or are we talking about a group experience or is it a combination of the two?
That's what makes it so challenging to deal with because it can be done by an individual, a group, or anonymously. I mean, we live in a world now where you don't always know who the bully is for quite a while. So it's definitely willful and repeated. So there is intent and we have examples of it. So it could be through personal websites of posting mean or harmful or threatening things, through blogs of professing something about someone that may or may not be true, could be sent in a harmful email or threats or through text, posted to social medias, a personal social media site, a chat, a message board, instant messaging somebody. You wouldn't even necessarily know who they are, even though they might have a name that isn't necessarily their name. Sending personal photos that maybe somebody received or took of you that without even your knowledge, and then photoshopping those or changing those or altering those to make it look like something else. And through the last way is through video game participants. You know, maybe a measure to get some leverage over someone or to take down an adversary in a game in a virtual world, which is now playing out in the real world. So like I said, the commonality of it is it's through technology or technological device means, but it can take so many different forms. And that's what makes it very different from that physical one-on-one, even with a group watching, and that it can go everywhere.
From a legal standpoint, the terms slander and libel immediately come to mind, but that really has no bearing on the subject because that's not something that you think about and perhaps not even something that can be applied in this case, correct?
I would say for the most part that is correct, is that it's a slippery slope. Who is it? And of course, you can only hold somebody accountable if you find out who it is. So that's why we give a lot of tips to parents, caregivers, schools, community members on how to back into it. Because of course, that's the trouble with caregivers, schools, law enforcement, is how to find out who it exactly it is and then attach that to a person. So what's interesting is that now more than ever, that youth report that they have been cyberbullied or harassed. More than 59% of US teens report that they have. And that's in every category, whether that's kids, parents, social media, schools. Everyone believes there's a problem.
And what it is intentional infliction of emotional cruelty.
It is. It is. And the most common forms, of course, are name calling, which aren't just, calling somebody out on something. It could be something vicious as bringing a comment about someone's perceived disability, or something that brings out differences, which again could take on a really negative form. False rumors that could affect someone's image, ability to apply for either something at school, scholarship, position at school, or even being part of something that image might be a factor in that decision.
So part of what Casey does is prevention of suicide. To what degree does this have a profound emotional impact that could lead to suicidal ideation?
That's one of the most pervasive problems that actually is the outcome of cyberbullying, is that victims are more than three times more likely to do self-harming behaviors. And, that could take the form of just using something on themselves, taking a chemical that's harmful for them, or threats of suicide, thinking about suicide. How do I get out of this? And the worst part about this is that the victim doesn't know who the bully is or how to stop it. And of course, we all know that adults know that once something's out there in the virtual world, that's very hard to take back, even if it's deleted. There's a digital footprint for that, so that it goes to many more people than bullies could be seen on the schoolyard, that now virtually hundreds of thousands of people could see it.
One of the things that we are painfully aware of is the high incidence of the LGBTQIA plus suicide, and how the act of being forced out rather than coming out impacts the individual, having a decision made for you before you're ready to make it yourself. Are you finding that that's an issue with cyberbullying as well?
Absolutely. Because with cyberbullying, the major intent is to make somebody feel isolated and alone. And if you have folks that already perceived to have forces against them in the community, that just makes them feel even more isolated. So that's why it is so important we spend as much time teaching individuals how to deflect the cyberbully or any type of bully personally, but why bystanders or those that we can teach not to send it on or look at it or be part of it, that also is perceived as a threat to that individual. People need support, and especially if they are already perceived to be attacked.
How do you teach kindness?
You teach kindness right from the beginning. What's interesting is that empathy and kindness, a lot of people think that's just something everybody has or feels or should feel. And the reality is children need taught. So what we believe is, one is children shouldn't have technology. It has really nothing to do with chronological age. It has to do with the ability to be able to manage something. We wouldn't give a 6-year-old a driver's license because they have really no understanding of what that means, except of getting to grandma's house maybe. So that's why it's important for us is, as we give youth, or they're expected to based on now doing online schooling, of that everything privilege comes with responsibility. So that, again, that they're taught right along what is privacy, what is appropriate, not only of them being part of the online, about what to do when you receive something back. The other thing is let's not assume that it's always kids talking to kids. That many times the adults get involved. Either parents get involved when they feel like their child has been maybe not got a position that they wanted, and there's some backlash with that, or worst case scenario is adults posing as children. So we can't assume that somebody online is always who they are. So that's why it's important to only friend or have those kind of online communications with people you actually know. Now, your friend count might be lower, but you're definitely safer. So teaching empathy is something that needs to go along with it. And there's a lot of things parents can do that set kids up for success until they're more ready. And that is setting controls, putting key words in that can block things, because kids aren't always ready for the actual negative experience. We have to get them ready. And that's through building of information and success.
Are there resource counselors in the schools that help deal with these issues, or does it all come back to you?
Actually, there's resources all around us. The schools definitely have resources, because now they're in a position where many of the school districts actually issue technology to get education done.
Especially now more than ever before.
More than ever. So there is a responsibility for the schools to monitor the technology that they give to the student and to the family. But it's also the responsibility of the caregiver to make sure that technology is utilized effectively. And the youth, there's expectations and should be followed through if they don't manage that technology appropriately.
What is the long-term impact? Because you talk about the short-term impact of what's happening to you on a daily basis or maybe during this school year, but is there a residual effect 5, 10, 15 years down the road?
Absolutely. There's already been an effect, and what we have seen is our lack of privacy. Our lack of privacy. We used to be able to go into our homes, and that could be, we could stop other things from coming into it. We can't do that as easily anymore. So that's what makes cyberbullying and just the need for privacy and boundaries so important, because it could come at us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it will come to us because it wants our money in the view of products. And of course you see ads all the time, but also not everybody's out for the good or for the youth safety. So we have to guard against that. And by doing that, we have to put the boundaries on it. So it's important to parents to put the boundaries on it. And that's why certainly teaching kids not to share passwords. Pictures are probably one of the most detrimental things to teenagers, of the sharing of pictures that they think are either innocent or maybe slightly risque. And again, that's why rules in social media with schools or at home are important, as about what's appropriate. I'll give you an example. With my own children, when technology was introduced, we had certain areas of the house that they were not allowed to either communicate from or to take pictures from. Because does the real world need to know what your bathroom looks like or your bedroom looks like? No, you would only take certain folks, as if, if you had very close friends, so that's why those same boundaries really have to be restated over and over again, because a lot of times they don't realize it. It's like I said, it's a slippery slope of just a little bit at a time. No big deal, one picture. And of course, location is everything. That not sharing locations with people other than your family, so that they will know where you're at, of course, for safety reasons, but other people don't need to know where your location is. And actually, that's some of the most harmful things have occurred because other people have found youth because they have shared location. And again, and I can't actually know, because you have already met them. You have already had some gauge to whether they're safe or not. But I will tell you that for males who typically, at least statistically, are more likely to cyberbully and statistically pose more threats actually to physical violence, on the females, or those that identify as females, are more likely to be the target, but are more likely to be targets of rumors, that frenemy concept. So, because they have intimate knowledge, because it's been shared information. So again, teaching kids personal information is something that goes along with development, and sometimes they learn the hard way.
What role does peer pressure play in this environment? Because the concept of being forced to do things or try things or have an experience is part of the maturation process. And again, I sound like my grandfather. In my day, it was done in the school or in the neighborhood. To what role does peer pressure play in the cyber community?
You're exactly right. Peer pressure has always played a role, will always continue to play a role. Which is interesting, is we think of peer pressure as a purely adolescent phenomenon, and in reality, peer pressure occurs as soon as a youth enters preschool and even with adults. So the most important factor in a cyberbullying situation, other than the victim itself and the things that they can do then with that, is the bystander. So the bystander is very, very important. Something can't go viral if in fact it's not spread on. So that has become a more important factor of eliminating or to stopping cyberbullying, is that now an individual, by that silence or laughing at it or sending it on, is part of that problem. And so we have to make sure there's accountability with that too, is that I realize that you weren't the first one to send it, but you're still part of that problem if you send it on. So in some ways, it increases the detriment.
So let me ask you this, because earlier in the broadcast, we talked about the importance of starting at the beginning, which I agree with. From the earliest ages, education is key. However, what about the education for the parents, the grandparents, and the teachers and the school administrators who are facing something that is simply not germane to their experience?
It isn't part of their initial experience, but again, everybody uses technology every day. So, and that whole education piece, I mean, I can appreciate it more than anybody. I grew up in a small town and we had a party telephone line. I'm sure
I remember
those three elderly families,
the party line.
Couldn't stand the three teenagers. So I can appreciate that more than anybody probably. But here's the important part of that, is that we are already using it, and we became educated on how to use our social media. Actually, statistically, senior citizens use Facebook almost more than any other age group.
Absolutely.
So it's really just becoming more educated about certain elements of that social media. So it's out there possible. And I think if we look at it like that, it doesn't seem so daunting. So you can't wait to introduce it. And there's lots of ways and help out there to be able to get more technology or technologically savvy about it. But what we can't do is, again, in any situation, is blame the victim. So don't take away the technology from the victim because they're receiving the cyberbullying. Instead, we have to teach kids how to manage it. Just like we did those arguments in the schoolyard, we have to teach them how to manage what happens when this happens. And it's probably even more important that they do something quicker because it's more detrimental. as time goes on. So there's no way for a parent or an adult to ever know and to be able to keep up with everything that comes to their youth and what's going on with technology.
Do you think it's harder for the victim to share their experience because it is happening in a cyber world rather than, Johnny threw sand in my face on the playground?
I think it's harder for the victim and the bystanders to want to do something to some extent because they never know how far it's going to be taken. If you see your bully in front of you, there's only so much they can do until somebody's noticed. I'll give you an example of a teacher catching a note being passed. As soon as that note is caught, that teacher rips it up, right? Well, now when will it be caught? And that's the same factor that the bystander is concerned about is, I don't want it turned on me.
Well, and you said yourself that cyber note can't be ripped up. There will be a digital footprint, and even if it's deleted, it's still there somewhere.
Right. But that can work to the advantage then of the victim in which to catch the cyberbully. Because those very things that they're using, those tools, can be turned around. So that's why it's important for parents to address it and document it, or the victim to document it, i.e. make a copy of that email, take a screenshot. What you don't want to do ever is retaliate by doing it back. What's interesting is most bullies, whether they're cyber or otherwise, were once bullied. So if you retaliate, you become part of the problem. We don't want that. So you don't retaliate, but you document it. Then you also save their URL or site location, because that can track back to their email or the computer or the device. Then you definitely can do things even as a victim. Untag yourself, which means unidentify yourself in a picture. That will at least help. Block somebody. Same thing as hanging up on somebody in the real world of phones, a blocking.
Good
and
day.
Then, of course, that's exactly right. We've lost that satisfaction, right?
Right.
And blocking certainly gives that back. Then all the social media platforms do have a way to report inappropriate sites, inappropriate information, or inappropriate contact. And I think they're getting better at that because of the potential legislation that could, if they don't handle it, then it'll be handled for them, that these boundaries will be put on it.
Are there any social media platforms that are worse than others for this? Because we talked about Facebook being more of a senior citizen's location. And you know what, I guess that makes me a senior citizen. I have my AARP card and I use Facebook every day. But what about platforms like Snapchat and TikTok and some of these other platforms? Are they more dangerous because the information comes and goes so quickly, or are they less dangerous?
They're certainly more dangerous because there are some platforms and sites that you can remain anonymous. So any site that you remain anonymous, which again is a parent tip, I wouldn't allow my children, you can block certain sites because that anonymous type of interaction usually breeds more negativity. People are being more honest, not really, but they're just, using terms and other things that the other platforms won't allow. So a parent certainly can block those. Anytime that you don't know who the recipient is of your communication puts you at risk. So that's why it's so important for parents to make sure there's some limits. Like I said, on sites, the dark websites, we call it dark web, is those that they have their own platforms and don't go by the regular social media type boundaries and guidelines. And again, setting preview policies when it comes to privacy settings on technology, setting location setting. Obviously, everyone should not open messages that they don't know who the real sender, who the sender is. Blocking keywords again. Passwords, not sharing passwords. Now, the only exception to that is that especially the younger the youth, and with these school situations now where they're online, this is an important one, is to have a family email. in which emails can come in to that site that the parent monitors. Now, the youth will have an email likely hooked to their school, but anything else should go into a central type email that then is monitored as far as appropriateness. And that's the one that's used.
So
The other thing you can do is monitor history.
right. Well, unless you clear your history, and then it's hard to monitor.
Right.
So it puts a lot of responsibility on the parental units to control what's happening with their children.
Well, the most important factor of that is that the parent's responsible anyway.
Right.
So if you have a minor child that you have purchased a device for, and that is not in their name because they're a minor, they're under 18 years old, it's in your name, you are responsible for what happens with that. So just
Not
like
only
if your child,
morally, but legally.
absolutely. Actually, I'm referring more to legally, but you're absolutely right, morally as well. So, for example, they're playing baseball in the yard, ball hits a window of a neighbor. They're responsible for paying that. Of course, I think the youth ought to work it off, but same thing in the cyber world. If there's damage done and it tracks back to your youth being the cyber bully or the one who has done damage somehow, and that's caused something that is equitable as far as money, then you could be held liable for it. So not only should parents do it because it's the right thing to do, and if you want to raise a youth that is law-abiding and does well as far as making decisions, then you're going to have to teach that responsibility all along, because essentially that's passing a little bit to them.
My baseball skills improved dramatically after the fifth window I had to pay for.
Use that example.
That's exactly.
Absolutely. And we can all relate to all these situations. Right. And that's why there's more similarities between generations. If you really think about it, it's just our modern day breaking the window with the baseball of holding our kids accountable. And you know what? Let's face it. I don't think our kids always know when they're outside the bounds. Sometimes we have to teach them when they went outside the bounds, especially as bystanders, maybe perpetuating something. I don't think the intent for some folks is always to do wrong, because one of the biggest reasons why cyberbullying starts is retaliation. So the kind of eye for an eye. But in this world, it takes a very dark turn very quickly. And that's why the effects of it is so detrimental, because it spreads so easily and it can be done anywhere by anyone. And it's easy to say, it's much harder to say things in person than it is hiding behind a computer or a device. So it's, even though it's harder for parents and officials to do it, we have to definitely keep our guard up about that, because it will happen to some extent, even if it's a very low form, whether your youth might be the victim or the bully, that we have to make sure that those boundaries are always set in a very adaptable and changing world. But there's lots of things out there to be able to help with that.
So we've talked about the child, we've talked about the parent, we've talked about the teacher, we've talked about the school administrator, we've talked about the community. Let's add one more element. To what degree is this being discussed in the religious institutions?
I brought that up because whatever a community is around a youth has, I believe, the responsibility and the opportunity to send messages. Of course, in the religious community, we can all agree, no matter what religion it is that of love and respect. So that is why the teaching of that, and again, those around them, of not only setting good role models, but of being that buffer when you know something's going on with them. And a lot of times you see it in behaviors before you even know that it's bullying or cyberbullying. The victim is going to show it maybe in psychosomatic, which is when your feelings affect digestive system, sleep disturbances,
sure,
anxiety, those sort of things. So you're going to see those behaviors, and those connections are so important of not only helping that youth, but to pull them out of that darkness and to help them, because what you don't want is the feeling of isolation and of that anxiety of growing and that there's no way out of it, hopelessness. So one person coming forward, whether it's a youth, that parent supporting them, a school person, their religious community, all of that will help to pull them out because they will feel like they're not alone with that.
Tracee Anderson is the Executive Director of CASey, Community Action for Capable Youth. Tracee, is there a website where people can learn more?
There are actually a couple websites. One is CASey, Community Action for Capable Youth. CASey, CACYOHIO.org. We send out newsletters, and we always talk about the different types of bullying and violence prevention. We also have another website that is called the Common Sense Media, spelled out, commonsensemedia.org, and it rates movies, TV shows, books, apps, and online games. That's very helpful for parents because they don't have the time or the energy to research everything. That's free, and I would encourage people to go that. And of course, if there is a crisis or something is going on and they see that based on the symptoms and the demise of the child as far as being able to cope with that, certainly we have an emergency helpline funded by the Richland County Mental Health and Recovery Board at 419-522-4357.
Terrific. Tracee, thank you so much for being on Coffee Talk today. This is a service of WMFD Television News and exclusively available on the website, WMFD.com. I want to thank our sponsor, the Cove Coffee Shop in Ontario, Ohio. I'm Jay Fox. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll see you next time on Coffee Talk.